provide for your kids and your wife. When you get too old to produce anymore, they hand you your hat and they show you the door. And you're too old to work, too old to work. When you're too old to work, you're too young to die. Who will take care of you how you get by when you're too old to work and you're too young to die? You don't ask for favors when your life is through. You've got a right to what's coming to you. Your boss gets a pension when he is too old. You helped him retire, you're out in the cold. And you're too old to work, too old to work. When you're too old to work and you're too young to die. Take care of you, how you get by when you're too old to work and you're too young to die. Hey.
And this is the world of work. Let's try again. This is the world of work, and I'm your host, Shep Cohen. With us today is Dave Combs, the author of Touched by the Music, How the Story and Music of Rachel's Song Can Change Your Life. Dave Combs grew up in a family that enjoyed making music. Both of his parents and his grandmother played the piano. His home, then, is where his musical journey began. His songwriting began with the now popular standard Rachel's Song. Since then, Dave has written 120 songs and recorded 15 albums. His music is soft, soothing, and relaxing. It's touched millions of lives around the world, and we're going to talk this afternoon all about his musical career and how he got involved and how he writes a song. Dave Combs, welcome to the world of work. It's a pleasure speaking with you.
Well, Shep, it's a pleasure to be here. This has been a long time in the making, but it finally arrived today, and I'm so delighted to be here with you.
Thank you. I mentioned in my introduction that you played music when you were younger. Your parents did. Tell me about where you grew up and the influence that your family members and your parents had on your musical career.
Well, I grew up in a small town in Upper East Tennessee. The name is Irwin, E-R-W-I-N, and it's near Johnson City and near Asheville, North Carolina, up in the mountains.
Yes.
And both my parents played the piano. My father played by ear. He couldn't read music very well, but he could sure play the piano by ear. And my grandmother Combs, his mother, I think, was the one that taught him because she could play by ear. And the instrument that she played, Shep, was an old-timey instrument that they called a pump organ. Some of your audience may remember the old pump organ. It was non-electric. It was purely mechanical. You pumped the thing with your feet to pump the air through it, and it made beautiful music on the keyboard. Well, she would play that old pump organ and sing a solo. And so that's where I got my early start with music, just being around family members and friends and church and so forth that just loved music. So I have my roots rooted in the East Tennessee musical tradition.
That's great. Was there any particular type of musical influences, or just that what you've mentioned?
Well, it was largely, of course, we were very active in our church. I'm a Baptist, so we were very active in church. So on Sunday morning, Sunday night, and even Wednesday night prayer meeting, we'd be at church. And a big part of the church that we attended was music. I mean, the singing of hymns, the choir singing specials. We had a wonderful organ and piano combination where we'd hear beautiful organ piano duets. So I think I grew up expecting music to sound like that. It was just rich harmony and beautiful music and very uplifting kind of music. And that really, I think, is ingrained in my music. And when you listen to the music that I have written, I think you'll hear some of that come through in those songs, that they sound like the people that are familiar with that music will say, well, I can tell where that came from. It's just part of me.
Now, you said that your father played piano by ear, and your mother, knew was able to read music. Did you take formal piano lessons?
Well, like most kids, I guess, if you're going to take piano lessons, you once your fingers are long enough to kind of work their way on the keyboard. About age 8, I started some piano lessons, and through the standard music books. I think it was called the Sham series, book 1, 2, 3, 4. You progress your way up taking piano lessons, and I had some good music teachers that would teach me the fundamentals of how to read notes and all that, how to read music and how to play it. And so I could play pretty well. And, by the time I was in high school, I had, of course, my voice had begun to change and I was able to sing.
Mm-hmm.
When you're 12 or 13, you may remember when we're 12 or 13.
Voice cracking.
You talk like this for a while. It's pretty funny. But once it settles down, then you can, pick whether you're a tenor or a baritone or a bass, you can sing your part. Well, I was active in the high school chorus, and that was a lot of fun. I learned a lot about choral music as well. I sang in the church choir, so I learned a lot about church music as well. And with my piano playing, some people in my church were really taking me under their wing and saying, Dave, I'd like for you why don't you play with the organist and play a piano duet with the organist for an offertory or a prelude at church.
Yes.
Well, boy, I can remember the first times I ever did that. I was so nervous. I'm sure I played in the cracks, as they say. It was pretty bad, probably. But that was kind of a motivation for me to learn to play better. And when you're playing with another instrumentalist, if you make a mistake, you don't stop and start over and do it again. You just keep going. So that methodology and that discipline, I think, speeds up your learning to play. So I really learned a lot by playing music in my church on the piano with the organist.
And how about performing? In essence, you're performing too. Did you learn a lot about the ability to perform?
Well, my musical career stayed pretty much in the performing at church as a church pianist with the organist, and then later on I got asked to be the choir director. Our choir director left, and they asked me to pick up and be the church part-time choir director, and I did that through my college years. They paid me a small amount each week to do that, to help me through college. And so I was conducting our church choir, and I was singing again in the university choir. But in terms of performing as a piano performer, the only performances I really was doing was at church. And that was pretty much the extent of my performances until I finally wrote Rachel's song. But I was 33 years old. It was kind of strange, Shep, that I had not written any music. I'd been involved in conducting choir and all this stuff, but I had never written any music until 1981, when I was 33 years old, wrote my first tune.
Now, music has played such an important role, an important part of your life. What is it about music that motivates you and really has let you devote so much time to music?
Well, like most people that enjoy music, whether you actually play a musical instrument or just simply say, well, I just enjoy the performance of music, whether they like to go to a symphony or to a concert or whatever, there's something about the listening to and enjoyment of music that does something, I think, to your well-being and your state of mind. When you're at a beautiful concert, whether, like one time I remember in college, I took my mom with me and we went to hear a concert by Roger Williams. You remember Roger Williams, the piano player.
Yes.
He had that beautiful arrangement of Autumn Leaves, and boy, that was just amazing to sit there with my mom and listen to Roger Williams make absolutely fantastic music flawlessly. And it's really an inspiration too. Not only does it sound beautiful and it does wonderful things to your attitude and your state of mind, but it's very inspiring and uplifting. So I think that the reason I love music is, first of all, because I play music. I'll hear a beautiful song and say, boy, I wish I could play that. Now, first of all, I'm not a performer. I do not play jazz music, but I love jazz music because it is such a wonderful medium and such a wonderful style, but that's not my thing to play it. But boy, I sure like to listen to it. It is just wonderful and inspiring to listen to. And that's true for a lot of genres of music. I like classical. I love classical symphonies and piano concertos, and I like the I like the music you play on WDVR radio. The oldies. My wife and you'll see behind me here are my piano and my keyboard.
Yeah, I see that.
My wife will sit at the piano and I'll sit at the keyboard, and we'll put on a CD of some doo-wop music from the 1960s. Those are really, the songs all kind of have the same chord progression, so we'll play along with them and just have a good old time making music from the 60s.
Some of the most fun that I have on the radio is occasionally I'll fill in for one of the DJs who has a music show.
Right.
And I've been doing that occasionally on Sunday afternoons for the last year, and I'll play Motown music.
Oh yeah.
and classical soul, and that's a lot of fun. I have a great time doing that, and I got a very good response.
It's great music, but so I like all kinds of music, and I probably am influenced by a lot of that too in the music that I have written, but I like it all.
So it's interesting that you mentioned that your wife also plays, and you, the two of you together will play at the same time. How did she get involved in music?
She has a little girl. She tells, I only met Linda when I graduated from college in 1969. So I've met her that fall of '69. And she was already working as a school teacher here in Winston-Salem at that time. So as I got to learn about Linda and her background and how she grew up as a little girl, she was also very active in her family in the local church, which was literally just 100 yards away from their house. And she was asked to play the piano for her little church when she was I think she said she was 13, 14, somewhere around there. And so she had the same kind of motivation that I did to learn how to play the hymns for the congregation to sing by. And so she was her church's piano player when she was a little girl. And so she's been involved actively with choir and music all of her life as well, even in college. And so when we met, we set up that the first date we ever had, and I went over to see her after I just met her. We sat and talked for hours about how much our backgrounds were so similar. She went to a Baptist church, I went to Baptist church. She played the piano, I played the piano. Our values and our backgrounds just kind of went like this. And it was only about 7 weeks later we were engaged.
Wow, that was fast.
We met on September 1st, and October the 11th we were engaged. So it was a love at first sight kind of thing. So, and by the way, we will have been married 52 years this coming June.
Wow. You have me beat by a few years. My wife and I did a show when we had our 50th anniversary of our first date, and we did a show which is actually archived on WDVR. So.
Great.
So during the time that you were, doing all these things at church, all these musical enterprises, what were you doing professionally? Not music-wise, but what was your day job?
Well,
which you didn't keep ultimately.
Well, before I got to my day job, I was a math major and physics minor in college. I have my BS in math and a minor in physics. And my first job out of school was to work for a company that's very dear to a lot of people in your listening area there, Western Electric. We had plants all over the country, and a lot of them were there close to where you are, including Bell Laboratories.
Yeah, Murray Hill, New Jersey.
Yeah, so that was my first, my job straight out of college. They hired me as a computer programmer to program a mainframe computer in the COBOL language. Some of your listeners may remember that, but it was in.
That's the early stages of computers.
Yeah, computers filled up rooms. I mean, when I would go to the computer center, the mainframe computer was the size of a good sized room. It was very large, and so, but now I've got more power here in my little iPhone than we had in the entire company at the time.
Yeah.
So, but that was my first job, was in information systems programming of a computer, and that progressed from then on into a management position. I got promoted into management, and then that part of it got into the materials management for Western Electric, where we were building huge warehouses around the country to supply the telephone equipment to the telephone companies. And then I got my MBA from Wake Forest University in 1978. I decided I need to further my education. So I got my MBA and then got promoted shortly thereafter to another level of management and managed about 1,000 people in a factory, 3 shifts a day. And that was a great job, learning how to literally make things from components, and out the door they go as a completed piece of equipment. And that was a great job. And then the next job that I got was one that I got chosen to help implement some new software to run the factory. We were computerizing about everything you can think of in the factory, including all the inventory control, production control, all of those aspects of managing the manufacture of something. And it got involved with what we today call logistics and just-in-time manufacturing, all those kind of things. And I was chosen to help implement that software throughout the factories. Well, before I had actually gotten into that part of it, I had written this song called, now called Rachel's Song. I'd written a tune in 1981 on my piano, and it just was a pretty melody. And I think we're going to possibly play it later on in the program. But it's an instrumental song that I just played on the piano. I didn't even really think of writing a song. I was sitting there, I just played it. And it just was an inspiration. It came to me, and I really think it was a gift to me from God. And that's about the only way I can describe it.
And a lot of people have thanked you for writing it because it's really as if God were speaking to them.
Exactly. And people that don't even know me and did not know anything about my background somehow get a blessing out of listening to that song. And so I really still believe that it was an inspired piece of music. And it didn't even have a name, Shep. We tried to name it, but nothing came up that sounded good. So 2 years later, some friends of ours had a little baby girl named Rachel, and they asked me and Linda to be her godparents. And at her christening service, there was a grand piano sitting up at the front of the church, and so I kept looking at that, and Linda and I are sitting there, of course, listening to the wonderful words being said by the minister about little Rachel. And at the end of the formal part of the service, I punched Linda and I said, "What do you think about me playing this little tune now that I've written as part of the service?" And she thought, "Wow, that'd be great." So I went up to the front of the church, since I didn't want to barge into the service, but I asked their permission if I could play this song and on the piano. They said yes, so everybody sat back down, and I went over to the grand piano and sat down and started playing. And I got about halfway through the song, and I hear some sniffles in the crowd, and I noticed my eyes were a little bit teary-eyed. It was a very highly emotional place to be, and the song just seemed to pull out the emotions out of us. And at the end of the song, when the notes were finally fading away, I looked over, and little Rachel was in the arms of her mother, and I said, "From now on, this song will be called Rachel's Song in her honor." And that's how it got its name, and it just was the perfect name for the song. Family loved it, we loved it, it was just perfect. And that was in 1983.
Wow, great story. Let me go back, and we're going to talk a lot more about your songwriting, but let me go back to Bell Labs. I know that you mentioned that although you didn't work directly in Bell Labs in New Jersey, that you interacted with some of the scientists, and a lot of them had backgrounds, if not backgrounds, experience in music, and they were piano players or whatever. Tell us a little bit about what you observed in that regard.
Well, I would fairly regularly get assigned to take a class that was at the Western Electric Bell Labs Training Center there in Morristown, New Jersey. Some of your listeners that probably live there know exactly where I'm talking about. It was a campus. They had classrooms, and then across the street, they literally had a dormitory where we stayed during the week while we were taking our course. And in the dormitory lobby, they had a piano sitting there, and I would often come in and find some scientist sitting there at the piano playing classical music. And it just was it struck me that, wow, I'm not the only scientifically oriented person that loves classical and playing the piano, loves music. So it was really an eye-opener to me that there is a connection, I think, between science and music. And the two are related. And if you look into, in fact, there are books written about the physics of music. There is if you want to study the tones and the frequencies and all that, you can do that. So there is a scientific connection. But then, of course, we're all used to the psychological and physiological effect of music on us. But science and music do seem to go hand in hand.
I'll ask you a hard question. What did you think of New Jersey when you came up here?
The amazing thing to me was...
A lot different from North Carolina.
Well, it was, but it wasn't. I was totally amazed. They would fly us into Newark. We'd get on a bus, and they'd bus us out to Morristown. Well, it wouldn't be 10 minutes outside of Newark, which is just wall-to-wall buildings and businesses and urban stuff. Outside of, you're 30 minutes later, you're out in farmland, beautiful farmland. Now, it may be not farmland anymore, but back then...
Not much of it's left.
But it was beautiful farmland. What is the nickname for New Jersey? Isn't it the Garden State?
Garden State, yes.
Yeah, well, I believe that because it was absolutely gorgeous. And it wasn't mountainous like I was used to in North Carolina and Tennessee, but it was beautiful farmland and rural, and the towns were so neat and clean and, very pristine, and it was just beautiful. I was very impressed. I always loved the trip out to Morristown.
We have a lot of suburban living in New Jersey. A lot of people take the train in from New Jersey, or did before the pandemic. Took the train in from New Jersey into New York City, worked there, and then came home. A lot different in that respect than you didn't have You don't have commuter trains, do you, in North Carolina? Or
not really. We have Amtrak does run through North Carolina, but by and large, we're still an automobile running state. We get to where we're going to go in our automobiles.
We're speaking this afternoon with David Combs, who's the author of Touched by the Music, How the Story and Music of Rachel's Song Can Change Your Life. The book that you wrote, what motivated you to write a book?
Well, let me back up and say, you remember 2 years ago when the emergency declaration was made about the COVID-19 virus?
Yes.
All of us, you, me, everybody else said, okay, we got to stay home and we can't get out or we're going to catch this COVID virus and it might kill us. And so for that year, we were pretty well locked down. Now, prior to that year, I had gotten in the mail over 50,000 letters from people over the years about Rachel's Song and my other music. I've written over 120 songs, recorded over 170. I have 15 albums. So the music's been out there quite a while, played on the radio, all over the country on easy listening stations, and now all over the world on the internet. So I had gotten 50,000 letters from people telling me what my music meant to them. And some of these letters, Shep, were really heart-wrenching and touching letters. You better get your box of Kleenex out when you read some of those letters. They really will tug at your heart. And so Linda and I had talked for years about maybe we should take some of these stories about how I grew my business from nothing up to 15 albums and how I sold my music in gift shops, all those wonderful stories. I should put them down in writing. And so I'd said, okay, but I had never agreed to sit down and do it.
Had you ever written before that?
No, that was my first attempt at a book, and I'd never done it before. That's the first.
So the pandemic comes. And
Linda says, we're sitting on a sofa one night, and she said, well, we've been talking about this for years. What are you going to do else? What else are you going to do during this pandemic? Get over there and write your book. So I said, okay, I'll open up my laptop and start typing down and writing up these stories. And I did. And it took me about 9 months or so to get all of those stories written. And of course, you have to run it past an editor or two. and there's all kinds of mechanics of getting it published. You got to design a cover, you got to get a forward written, and I was very fortunate to have Jack Canfield write the forward to my book. And Jack has been a great mentor to me. In fact, I was on a Zoom meeting with Jack just yesterday, but he was kind enough to write the forward to my book, because guess what? He loved Rachel's song. The first time he ever heard Rachel's song, he played it again. He just said, I was smitten by that song. And then we got to talking, me and Jack, about my stories about this, and he also encouraged me. He said, Dave, you have got to get these stories written into a book. And so I spent 9 months doing that. At the end of the 9 months, I got the book.
How do you know Canfield?
I was fortunate enough to attend one of his retreats. He calls them a mastermind retreat, where he takes about, I think it's 17 people at most, and for 3 days, you spend those days with Jack. It used to be you'd spend them at his house in California, but these days it's virtually via Zoom. So for 3 days, I was with Jack Canfield and 16 other people for about 12 hours a day. We'd start at 10 in the morning and end up at 10 at night, and with a break for lunch and dinner or whatever. But so I got to know Jack really well over those 3 days, and he got to know me. In fact, if you go to my website, combsmusic.com, and go to my interviews, right at the top of my interviews is an interview that I did with Jack. So he has become a wonderful supporter, and I'm eternally grateful for him for doing that.
Did you self-publish, or did you have a publisher? I know that there's a lot of controversy over those publishing questions.
Well, with the technology today, basically you can create your product digitally. You create a Word file or a digital file of your book. You can upload that book to Amazon along with the cover and so forth, and have it basically available to print just like that. Once you've got it all formatted and everything. So there is no middleman necessary to actually physically publish your book. You can write a book and create it and upload it to Amazon and start selling it immediately. You do not have to go through a publisher. And it used to be that the publisher was there to basically help you market the book and give you a lot of exposure. Mm-hmm. But those days are being supplanted by the Amazon marketing. When people want to know about a book or search for a book, what do? They go on either Google or Amazon and say, I want to know a book about so-and-so. Bingo, there's 15 books that pop up. Some of them are self-published. Some of them may be published by a big publisher. But most of them are now self-published. So I decided, well, I don't need to pay anybody to do something. They're going to ask me to do all the marketing anyway. I'll just publish it myself. And I did. And it's available right there on Amazon. And I did a paperback. I did a Kindle book where you can upload it on your Kindle player, your laptop, whatever your tablet. And I also sit in this studio where I'm sitting right now, and for 30 hours, I recorded my book. I narrated the whole, I read the whole thing. So if you want to hear me talk for 8 hours, you can buy the Audible book and listen to me talk for 8 hours. So I did that myself, and it wasn't really a hard decision for me. I knew how to do it mechanically. And most people said, well, why not? Why would you give half of your book away to a publisher, and why don't you do it yourself? So I did.
So you didn't have to go on a book tour then, or did you do
my book? Like you're looking at my book tour right now. This is one of my book tours here, I guess. But I've enjoyed being on podcasts. I do 3 or 4 a day literally around the world.
Wow.
Whether it's London or Australia, it doesn't matter. It's like next door. Mm-hmm. But I enjoy talking to people like you, Shep. It's, you and I can spend an hour together here, and by the end of the hour, we feel like, well, I've got a new friend here. I can call him up sometime, talk about something else. It's a great way to connect with people, I think.
It really is. I'm very fortunate. Every Friday, I get to speak with a very interesting person about something different every week. Mm-hmm. It's very interesting.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, let's take a break now. We're speaking with David Combs, who is the author of Touched by the Music, How the Story and Music of Rachel's Song Can Change Your Life. This is The World of Work, and I'm your host, Shep Cohen. And now this.
Hi, I'm Darlene Love, and I'm listening to Shep Cohen. He's a rebel on WDVR-FM. God bless. Bye-bye.
Hi, this is Gene. Tune in Fridays at 5 for 2 hours of energetic rock and pop that'll help you to remember what it felt like to really rock back in your hippie days. That's Anything Goes. Fridays, 5 to 7, only here on WDVR.
Tune in Friday nights from 7 to 10 p.m. and relive the big band years. Right here on WDVR.
Do you like adventure? Then pack a snack and join me, Melba Toast, on the road less traveled. We'll enjoy a wide variety of music on our travels and learn about each other too. Join me on Saturdays from 4 to 6 p.m. and we'll see where this road takes us.
Boom, boom, doo 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 boom, boom, doo 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 boom, boom, doo 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 boom, boom, doo 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 boom, boom, doo 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 boom, boom, doo 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 boom. We plant the food, we drive the cab, we load the ship, we run the lab, we build the bridges, we fly the plane, we do the work. This is our day. We do the work. Boom, boom. We do the work. Boom, boom. We do the work. This is our day. We type the page. We clean the streets. We sew the clothes. We change the sheets. We sell the goods. Yes, we do. We lay the stone. We do the work. This is our home. We do the work. 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 This is our home. We dig the ditch. Yes, we do. We serve the meal. We give the care. We mold the steel.
And we're back on the air. This is The World of Work. I'm your host, Shep Cohen. And we're going to continue our conversation with Dave Combs, who's the author of Touched by Music, How the Story and Music of Rachel's Song Can Change Your Life. And I'm going to try right now to play Rachel's song for you. Let me see if it works out. One second. All right. It's not playing right now, but Dave, before I get you, hopefully I'll be able to play it in a few minutes. So you wrote your book. It took you 9 months. Did you have anyone edit it for you?
Yes, I actually ended up hiring 2 editors. One was would be a content editor, your normal, that's looking for misspellings and formatting and the sentence structure and all those kind of things, the English, making sure it makes good English. And then I also hired somebody to help me with the narrative part of it, a storyteller type of an editor that he would help me make the story have enough dialogue and interest and really be a show instead of a tell. I wanted to bring, in my book, I wanted to have, when I talked about recording Rachel's song in the studio, for example, I wanted people to be in that studio with me, to have them come in and feel the excitement that I felt when I was first hearing Gary Prim play Rachel's song on the piano in the studio for the first time in August of 1986. What an experience to hear, because up to that point, I had never heard anybody play my music. It was just me. And so when I got Gary Prim to do the demo recording for me, that's the first time I'd ever heard any professional music play any music that I'd written. In fact, I'd only written the one song. So out of that 45-minute recording session or so with Gary Prim, I walked out of there with what I considered to be a masterpiece of music. It was as good as anything I'd heard on the radio, and it wasn't exactly toe-tapping exactly like that song that we just heard. And that was a great song, by the way. But at the end of the 45 minutes with Gary, I had a masterpiece of a recording, and it was supposed to be just a demo that for my own enjoyment and the enjoyment of Rachel and her family. Well, I'm not one to keep something to myself, so I played that song for a lot of people. Anybody wanted to, I could corner it and let them hear it. I played it for them. And I played it for a gentleman, a friend of mine, who had a radio program, much like your lead-in said that you have a big band program that comes on later.
Later tonight,
and
yes.
He had a program on Saturday morning that was much the same thing. He was an expert in big band jazz music. And he would play, he was the DJ, and he would play and talk about who the song was written by, who the band members were, all those kind of side interests that you can tell about a song. And he was taken, my friend Bob was taken by the music of Rachel's song. He just was blown away. He said, "Dave, you got to let me play this on the radio." I said, "Well, okay." So I loaned him my master tape of Rachel's song. He took it to the radio station. They made a copy of it and played it on the radio that next Saturday morning on his show. And then I got a call from the station manager after the program was over. And he says, "Dave, I've been in radio for over 20 years, and I have never had this happen before. The phone lines at the radio station lit up. They wanted to know, what was that song you just played? Play it again. Tell me more about Rachel's song, and tell me more about this Combs guy that lives in Winston-Salem." And so then is when I realized that I needed to do something more with my song than I had really originally planned. So I got busy and figured out how to get my song played on all the easy listening radio stations in the entire country, including stations there in the Pennsylvania, New Jersey area.
And what was your trick?
Well, I would call the program directors. First of all, I had to get a list of easy listening radio stations. And now that's almost a dinosaur. You can't find an easy listening station almost anywhere. But back then we had about 400 of them.
Yeah,
almost every market.
Elevators.
Yeah, all the big markets had an easy listening format station. So I bought a radio and records publication that had all the radio stations listed by format. So I called all the easy listening stations, spoke to the program directors of the station, sent them a copy of Rachel's song, and to a person, they all put it into their programming. And I eventually also sent it to a Bonneville Broadcasting program director, because he programmed about 200 radio stations at one time. So once he put it out there, it went out to 200 stations all at once. Well, that was how I got my recording played on the radio nationwide, and that's when the fan mail started. People started writing to me. They'd call the station and tell them, get my address, and they'd write me a letter. And that's when that 50,000 number of letters and notes that I got started, was back when the radio airplay really started all over the whole country.
You have another great story about how you actually got it recorded. You went down to Memphis or someplace, or in the middle of the night, and there's one studio open. I read that in Two-Part Harmony.
Yeah, that was actually in Nashville.
Nashville, okay.
Yeah. I was, Linda had told me once we had Rachel's song written and named, that we needed to do something else with it. And so she says, well, while you're working in Nashville, which I was, we were cutting over some new plant software at the Western Electric plant there in Nashville. And so in the evenings, she says, why don't you go and find a studio and get a demo recording made of Rachel's song? I said, okay, well, I'll give it a try. So I drove around Nashville, Tennessee, downtown, and there's a special area of Nashville, if those that go visit there, that's called Music Square. I think it's about 2 square blocks.
Yeah, no,
and inside those blocks, everything is music. It's got the Country Music Hall of Fame, the Songwriters Hall of Fame, the ASCAP and BMI and RCA Studios, and all this recording, music, anything related to music. So I thought, well, surely I can find something here. So I drove down a street called Roy Acuff Place. Some of your listeners will remember Roy Acuff. He was a big country music star. And at the end of Roy Acuff Place, on the right, was a building that looked like a barn, and out front it had a water wheel, like an old mill water wheel, great big thing. And on the side of the building, it said, the Music Mill. I thought, well, that's encouraging. So I went around and drove in the parking lot. Sure enough, there was through the glass door, I could see there was a man sitting at the desk. So I knocked on the door, and he came and opened the door and said, hi, I'm George Clinton. Can I help you? And I said, well, I'm Dave Combs, and I have a song that I'd love to have recorded in a studio by a musician. And I'm looking for a studio. And he said, well, come on in. And so as I went into the lobby, I looked up on the left, and on the wall, here's a great big life-size picture of Glenn Campbell. Over here is a great big picture of the group Alabama.
Yes.
The Forrester Sisters, gold records, platinum records, all over the place. And George says, well, Dave, you're in a studio. This is the Music Mill recording studio. Huh. And I'd never been in one. I'm sure I know you've been in recording studios, but it was my first time. So he gave me a tour of the place. There wasn't anybody recording at the time. So I went over into Studio A. Big room. You could put an orchestra in this room. Big grand piano over in the corner. And then we went into the control room where they had the console. Now, you've seen these consoles. They're impressive, aren't they? All these sliders and
massive
knobs and lights, everything on them. I thought, well, you could launch a spaceship from this room. It was impressive. I said, George, how much does this place go for? And he said, how much can I rent it for? And he says, it's $125 an hour plus engineer. Now remember, Shep, that this was in 1986. $125 an hour was a lot of money back then.
A lot of money.
Yeah. So he said, but don't worry. He said, the fellow who owns this recording studio owns another one across the street. It's a tiny little studio in a little small house. That's $15 an hour plus engineer. I said, that works for me. I said, okay, now I need a musician to play my song, somebody, a good piano player. And he thought for a second. He said, I know just the person. His name is Gary Prim. I said, okay. And he said, let me go over here and get his phone number. So he went over to his Rolodex and looked up Gary Prim. And
sorry, did you say that again? Sorry.
My watch is talking to me, sorry. And so he said, let me look it up on the Rolodex. And he wrote down the phone number for Gary Prim and handed it to me. And I left and went back to the hotel, called Gary Prim on the phone, and I got his answering machine. He called me back in about 30 minutes, and he says, Gary, this is Gary. Can I help you? I said, yep, I got this little tune that I've written, and I understand from George Clinton that you could possibly do a demo recording for me. He said, absolutely. Just send me a copy of a recording on a cassette tape of you playing it, and then send me a lead sheet. And I said, well, what's a lead sheet? I didn't even know what a lead sheet was.
All you knew is that you wanted to get it recorded.
That's all I knew. But he said, oh, it's just the melody and the chords all written out on a piece of paper. I said, well, I've got that. I just didn't know to call it a lead sheet. So I got back home, sent that to him, and in a couple of weeks, we met on August the 22nd, 1986, at 6 o'clock at night at this little studio in Nashville to record Rachel's song. And I never will forget it. Gary comes in, first time I've ever met him, and he brings his synthesizer in with him and sets it up, and then they had a little baby grand piano in the studio, a little Yamaha baby grand. It turns out, I found out later, was the original Yamaha baby grand, first one that ever shipped from Japan to Nashville. I would love to know the history of that piano. How many musicians in Nashville ever played that little baby grand from Japan on a Yamaha? Who knows? Maybe Elvis, maybe Floyd Kramer. All these wonderful people probably played that piano. But anyway, Gary sits down at the piano and starts playing, warming up, and I'm in the control room with the engineer. And pretty soon, Gary's ready to record, so he pushes record on the recording machine, and Gary starts playing. He gets halfway through the song, he stops. He said, "Nope, I can do better than that." So we rewind the tape and start over, and he plays the song on the piano perfectly all the way through to the very end. And all through playing, I cannot believe what I'm hearing. Now remember, I had never heard my music played by any professional musician or any other musician, period, except me. So I was blown away by the arrangement that Gary came up with for my song. And the piano part was absolutely, by itself, was just perfect in my opinion. But Gary says, "Nope, I'm not done yet. I've got to add some more to this. I want to make it the piano part a little bit richer, so I'm going to double the piano with the electric piano on the synthesizer." So he puts his headphones on like you've got on now, and he's listening to the piano part while he's playing the electric piano on the keyboard. He nailed it. I mean, all the notes were just boom, right? As they call in music world, it was tight. The notes were just exactly right. And then he said, "Well, I need some bottom to this song and some top to it. So let's put some strings." So 2 more tracks. Let's record some low strings. 2 more tracks. He recorded some high strings along with it. And then in the middle of the song, he did something I didn't do. The song is written in the key of C to start with. He played the first 2 verses in the key of C. And then the third verse, third time through, he moves it immediately up from C to C sharp or D flat, whichever you want to call it, up a half step. And it wasn't even modulated up. It was just an instant. When you hear it play, you'll hear it go from C instantly into D flat, the next level up.
Yes.
And that just kind of bumped the energy of the song up a level. When you're listening to music, sometimes a key change up a half step will really just give it an extra little bit of energy. And it was amazing. And when he finished all of that, Gary was done in about 45 minutes, wrote him a check for the agreed upon fee, and he packed up his synthesizer and went home. And the engineer spent the next hour or so to mix down the tracks to stereo to get the balance just right. And then he made me some cassette tapes and a master tape that I could take home with me to make records if I wanted to. And I paid him, and I left. So here I walk in at 6 with a piece of paper with music, and I walk out about 8 o'clock with an absolute masterpiece of music that I could not believe my ears. And that was just absolutely a life-changing event for me. I kept saying to myself, "This is it." I didn't know what it was, but this was it. And it turned out to be an important watershed event in my life.
In what way, if you just elaborate a little bit about why it was a watershed event in your life?
Well, up to that point, I had been working. My career was with Western Electric, AT&T. It became AT&T in 1984 when they broke up the Bell system. So in '86, it was AT&T. And my career had been with them since I got out of college. And I had pretty well thought that I would work for them till I retired. But this particular song, turns out it led to me thinking about music as a possible alternate career for myself. And as with subsequently writing over 120 songs and 15 albums and selling the music all over the country in gift shops, my little song started the ball rolling on what would be a career in music. Now, it wasn't a straight line. Obviously, from '86 to quitting my job in 1992, there was a lot of water under the bridge, as they say, between those 2 dates. But for 6 years, basically, I worked my tail off in the evenings and weekends to basically build my music business and to spread the not just Rachel's song, but then later as I wrote more music, to add to my catalog of music and find ways to market that music and get it into additional people's hands so they could listen to it.
Now the way you worked, was your aim to retire from your job at AT&T and go into music full time, or did it just happen one day?
Well, I was too young to actually draw an active retirement. When I quit my job, I literally quit it. I didn't retire. I had to resign, basically. But I was eligible for what they call a deferred retirement. I had to wait until I was 65 years old to retire. I think I was 44 at the time when I quit my job, but I had to wait till I was 65 to begin drawing even one penny of my retirement from AT&T. So, but it was such that I felt like that my music was touching so many lives and being so well received, and I was making a good living at it. I was making a lot, two or three times what I was making at AT&T at my music business when I finally quit. So it wasn't a hard decision in terms of, I don't know whether I can make this or not. I knew that I could make a go of this because I'd already demonstrated that even on a part-time basis. So who knew what I could do on a full-time basis?
Did you ever think you'd be an entrepreneur?
Yes. Even back to my 6th grade, I decided I was going to grow some potatoes on our acre of land there in Tennessee and sell them to my elementary school cafeteria to make some money. So even as a 12-year-old kid, I was growing potatoes and harvesting them and selling them to my elementary school to make some money. I had a paper route. I delivered papers. There's this one woman there in Tennessee, she still owes me $35 on the paper route. I doubt if I'll ever collect it, but that was, who knows how many years ago that was.
Let me ask you, before we're almost coming to an end, there was a man with an iron lung who
Yes.
said that Rachel's song brought him back to life not only once but twice.
Yes.
Tell us that story.
Well, it was a very short postcard. Obviously, somebody in an iron lung doesn't have the ability to write a long letter or anything. It was a postcard, and it simply said that he gave me his name, and he said, I have been in an iron lung for a long time, and he said, I have flatlined 3 times, and your music, he said, brought me back to life 3 times while he was in that iron lung. And that was just one little postcard note, but you can imagine the impact that had on me as a person that saw that my music, that I didn't know this person, he didn't know me, but my music somehow was an instrument that helped save his life. I have lots of other letters from people that they used my music to assist somebody with cancer with their pain and played at their last, as they were breathing their last breath, they were hearing Rachel's song in a headset or something. Those were really touching letters.
The teenage girl who nearly drowned from riptide currents.
Yeah, she was 16, I think, when she wrote me this sweet letter, and she, I guess it's unusual for a 16-year-old girl to write to a 40-some-year-old guy, a musician, a letter, but she wrote that. She said, I have to write you because my parents gave me Rachel's song as a gift for new life. She said they were at the beach out in the ocean swimming, and she got caught in a riptide and got pulled out into the ocean. And she said I was literally drowning. She said I was swallowing water. I thought I was gone. And she said her older brother, reached her and pulled her back to shore on pure adrenaline. And she said this gift of Rachel's song, and her name was Rachel, and so this gift of Rachel's song to her was just a reminder of how precious her life is, and she just wanted to take the time to write me and thank me for writing her special song.
And you have something to do with James Bond also.
Yeah, I wish I'd had more to do with it, but I did get an invitation to write some music for a James Bond movie. My wife had met an attorney who was an attorney to the stars in Hollywood. He happened to be visiting in Washington, D.C., and I forget the circumstances, but she met him, and they got to talking about music, and she gave him a copy of Rachel's song, and he loved it. And so he said, I've got connections. These movie stars, they're my clients. And so he said, let me take this back and see what I can do. Well, lo and behold, he got connected up with Universal Studios, who were filming a new James Bond movie. The title of it was called The Living Daylights. Now, I'm a huge James Bond movie fan. Every time one comes out, I got to see that James Bond movie. So he called me and he said, these folks at Universal Studios would like to send you the script to the James Bond movie and have you submit a song that could be considered for the theme song for the movie. Excuse me. And so I thought, wow, this is amazing. So he sent me the music, the script,
Yes.
and I got busy writing some music. A friend of mine, Stan Moon, wrote the words, and we went out, got it recorded, went out to Hollywood and submitted it. And it was a great song, but didn't get picked. Some other group by the name of Aha, a rock group, got the pick for the song. But I got a great song out of it because I went back and made it, instead of being a vocal song, I made it instrumental. And when you look on my Rachel Song album, the third track is a song called Your Love. Now, the original song was called Danger in Your Love. That was the James Bond version with words. So I took the danger off of it and just said, Your Love. So when you listen to the music on track 3, that's the James Bond theme movie that they should have picked.
Well, we have a minute left. We've been speaking this afternoon with Dave Combs, who's the author of Touched by Music, How the Story and Music of Rachel's Song Can Change Your Life. It's a pleasure really speaking with you this afternoon. Sorry we weren't able to play the song, but I know many people know it and appreciate all the background information that you gave us about your career and publishing and recording, etc. So thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate it. I hope folks will simply go to my website. It's very simple, Combs Music, COMBSmusic.com. And that's all you got to remember, to go there and you'll see my book, my music, and there's even a link in the middle of that page to play Rachel's song for yourself, the whole song. So combsmusic.com, go there and write me an email at dave@combsmusic.com, and I'd love to hear from you. And thank you, Shep, for spending an hour with me on the radio. It's been my pleasure.
It's been great. Thank you very much. You were very interesting and informative, and I appreciate that. Until next week, this is The World of Work, and coming up next is Gene with Anything Goes. And have a good week, everyone.